I'm here. We're talking about a very confronting book and topic. But let's start off with some business stuff.
Sure.
So talk to me about this publishing and publication. It's Ginninderra Press?
Ginninderra Press.
Ginninderra Press.
I can tell you the background. I've actually been bequeathed this publishing house. It's been run for 28 years, and my very dear friend, he's very, very terminally ill, and he didn't want his publishing house to die with him, effectively, to put it bluntly. So it's, you know, it's emotional, and it's a legacy that I intend to maintain. I've inherited a lot of projects that were works in progress, but this particular title I was working on as an independent publishing consultant, and I was helping the author. And then when she heard that I was being given a publishing house, she said, please let me publish with you. So that's how that's come about.
Wow. So how much are you going to be driven by guilt? You're Jewish. Guilt is part of your... I'm
endemic.
Jewish. You're
endemic.
Jewish. There's guilt flowing everywhere.
I know. I've got a bit of guilt because I've got all these authors that are waiting, and then I've got this book that's kind of come in, and that's kind of, because the author's coming out in October, all the way from Mallorca, where she now lives.
So we have to explain that she's Australian.
Yes.
Sydney born.
Yep.
Was financially successful in Sydney.
Correct.
And then went to London and had an unhappy marriage, and then ended up in Mallorca.
Correct, where she's been for many years, and she's a sculptor. But
yes, that's right, she's a sculptor. Like,
yeah,
nauseating.
I know, she's incredibly talented. But what happened right at the beginning, I mean, you know, we'll get to it, but the traumatic childhood was somehow she pulled herself out of that, and she got a job in real estate when she could, you know, she didn't leave school with the graduation papers because she'd lost the ability to read and to retain information through trauma. But she got a job in a real estate agent, and eventually she said to her boss, if you buy that property, I'll help you renovate it. And it was on the cusp of Paddington's gentrification. And from there, she made a small fortune. She became this sort of Baron of Paddington and set up her own agency. Baroness, correct. And yeah, it was just a timing and also a creativity and an ability to make things out of, you know, effectively nothing. And in the day, Paddington was a slum.
That's right. If I can just explain to the poor old Melburnians or non-Sydney-siders who are watching this, Paddington's sort of between Centennial Park and the Double Bay.
Yep, it's absolutely. It's on the cusp, but it's at the start of the eastern suburbs, really. Oxford Street.
It's not a harbourside suburb.
No, but it's got those beautiful double-sized terraces. And
yeah,
they're
but
iconic.
It's got the iconic Paddington Terrace.
Yeah.
And it was a slum, but now it's super groovy and has been for decade after decade.
Yeah, and we've got Judy to thank partially for that, because she had the vision and she started this regeneration, I guess, of the houses, and yeah, she was able to sort of take off and try and put behind her the past, but it keeps bubbling up, of course.
So can I just warn people, we're talking about Agnes. This is the name of the book. It's by Judy King. It's called A Childhood Betrayed and Reclaimed, and as you can hear, she has had an amazing career. It's about sexual abuse. So if I can just warn everyone, if you find this sort of stuff triggering, who doesn't, be careful. The start of the book starts in London with her dud husband. So she had a dud husband.
Second dud husband.
She's got a talent for spotting them.
Well, it's part of the trauma.
We're easy to spot. Dud husbands are easy to spot. We're, you know, every second one of us is pretty dud.
I didn't say it.
No, but I'm having a bit of remorse about my own spectacularly unhusbandly self. So that's where she started. I thought that was a funny place to start.
Yeah, but it's about her getting on the plane to come back home at the behest of her ageing narcissistic mother, as it says on the back cover.
She didn't spare the mum.
Oh, the mum is the villain. The mum, the father, the extended family. I mean, she was just literally a subject of abuse from all quarters. But then there'd be these external people providing kindness, but they were always short-lived because something would happen that would traumatically cut an end.
They'd die.
Yes.
They'd leave.
They'd leave, or they'd cut her out once they kind of like had too close a shave with her awful parents. I mean, they were shocking. So,
but you can imagine
yeah.
encountering that family unit would be a bit of a turn-off.
Oh, constantly. And despite all of this, Agnes is literally Agnes of God. I mean, she is like this angelic child. Even the cover of the book is this sort of
The cover of the book, there's this, it's beautifully artistically rendered because it's a black and white with sort of grey, and then there's Agnes or Judy.
Yeah, it is Judy.
It's Judy, you know, this beatific
exactly,
girl.
And in the Strand Arcade. So the other thing about the book is that she captures the essence of post-war Sydney so magnificently. It's like you're walking through the streets and recalling places and times, historical events that happened while she was young, and she'd sort of read snippets of news that she'd find in her mother's knitting bag. And so you kind of, it's contextualised in a way that gives such a sort of resonance to the book. So it's not just all trauma, it's beautifully written, which makes it easier to kind of, you know, stomach.
And just to revisit, I lived in post-war Sydney.
See, I'm a little bit younger.
Yeah. I'm just about to turn 70. Anyway, so my dad would sit on some of those harbour beaches and say to my grandfather, Uncle Abe, as you call him, this is the most beautiful city in the world. Yep. And for a Melburnian to admit that must have been deeply painful. I mean, we hate Sydney.
I've got this divided loyalty because I've lived here 17 years and I love Melbourne, but you can't compare
and now
the physicality
you're
of
stuck here, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm stuck here. My kids are Melburnians, you know.
Yeah. You know, you have this, in my mind, I've got this whole contradiction where you've got post-war Sydney, amazing, beautiful, people have houses adjacent to the harbour or the surf beaches.
Yep. But even the leafy North Shore, she describes Gordon Station, which is where I caught the train to school every day. She describes, you know, just down to the gardens and how from Chatswood to Roseville, the style of the houses changed. She's got this, despite having lost so much of her memory, like huge chunks of her childhood, she is so, in her writing, in her 60s, able to recapture all of this sort of, you know, the beauty, the physical essence, and she remembers the minutiae, the detail, in terms of, you know, trips to David Jones, the fashion labels that her mother would buy.
I mean, DJs was just such a thing.
It's iconic.
Yeah. Wasn't it on the road to Melbourne, to Sydney Uni?
Oh, absolutely, in the middle of the city, and I mean, they probably didn't, so they didn't have sort of Chatswood Chase and Westfield plazas back then, so everybody went to the city to do their shopping. You know, but she talked about the makeup counter and Elizabeth Arden and Helena Rubinstein, and I mean, these names aren't necessarily iconic these days, but you're drawn back into that era.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's pretty incredible.
What do you want to say about the abuse?
Oh, it's so traumatic, and there are so many incidences, and every single page that is a page turner. Every page is sort of on the edge of your seat thinking... Dripping
with...
trauma.
Trauma, yeah.
And then there's this sort of like ability for Agnes to sort of keep coming through. Her way of repressing and disassociating, and actually then there's that sense of self-shame, not understanding what's happening to her, thinking must be something that she's done, she must be guilty somehow. She turns to God. She's brought up in these convents. I think the school she went to, she talks about the brother schools, which is
Kirribilli, it's on the North Shore.
Yeah, so she's living
a North Shore girl.
North Shore girl. She goes from Gordon, where the first trauma, which is gripping, I mean, edge of your seat gripping, and it actually happened, and there's a Sydney Morning Herald article that she still has to this day about that particular event, which I can tell you if it's not giving away too much.
Up to you.
Okay, so she had this beautiful neighbour. She was, you know, She didn't know that she was in an abusive family environment because she's a little girl, so it's just what she knew. But she had this really good friendship with this boy who was a few years older. His parents were Holocaust survivors. They lived in Gordon, and his dad's a scientist, and they're always there with them learning, and she's holding his hand one day, and there's been a massive storm, and outside her house is a hanging wire. He holds the wire, he gets electrocuted, he dies in front of her. She's let go of his hand. Somehow she's survived. She finds out later that her mother made sure she was wearing gumboots. So her mother had seen the wire, not done anything about it, but the parents blamed her for this child's death. I mean, it's a trauma that you can't imagine, and it's in the newspapers. She's changed the names in the book, but that was the beginning of the time.
I mean, how terrible is that? Holocaust survivors.
Their only child.
Their only child, God.
And so there's that resonance of, you know, this post-war era, the kindness of others, the lack of kindness at home, which just makes it all the more apparent, but her trying to reconcile because she loves her mummy and daddy, and she's always trying to think the best of them. So, you know, just it's unnerving, but it's compelling.
Thanks very much for coming in, Vora.
Thank you so much. That's my new name.
And Deborah Lee, who's the publisher of this great, interesting, confronting, but ultimately uplifting book, Agnes, A Childhood Betrayed and Reclaimed by Judy King. Thanks very much.
Thank you.